Well, welcome back, everyone, to our second session in this four-part series titled The Way. Tonight, we're going to spend our time with this title, Forming Community Through Eucharistic Solidarity. So a little bit of a mouthful, but perhaps, as we're going along, we'll get a better sense even of what this title means, and we'll be breaking it open together and talking not just about some ideas, but hopefully very practically about things having to do directly with parish life. Hopefully we can touch on things that we're all familiar with from our life in the parish and things that we may want to think about and do. Just to sort of reorient us very briefly on the basis of what we did last time, you'll remember that I presented to you these several verses from the second chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. And the reason we went here is because in the Acts of the Apostles, we hear of the earliest Christian communities. And as part of the earliest Christian communities, they had a certain way of life. In fact, as I told you last time, or reminded us last time, before Christianity was called Christianity, it was just called the Way. Christians were known for the way in which they lived their lives. And as we hear here in the second chapter of the Acts of the Apostles, there were really four pillars or four building blocks on which the Christian life was built. And we get them right there at the top. The teaching of the apostles, that is faith formation in its first form. The communal life, sharing all things in common. The needs of one were the needs of all and vice versa. The breaking of the bread, the earliest Eucharistic celebrations and gatherings. And then the dedication to the prayers, the daily prayers. Really, you could really think of it as the formation of the liturgy of the hours, the regular marking of the day according to periods of prayer. What we're going to spend our time with today is really somewhere in the midst of number 2 and number 3 on there. This Eucharistic solidarity, forming community in Eucharistic solidarity, has to do with both the communal life and really the response of the breaking of the bread, the Eucharistic solidarity of Christ. So that's where we're going to spend our time both talking about, imagining, and thinking today. Now, I don't know if you caught this, but last Thursday, we received for our session tonight a papal blessing. Did you see this? It wasn't hidden. It was, in fact, right there in the New York Times. Pope Francis had an op-ed in the New York Times. I mean, let's be honest, it wasn't really an op-ed. He didn't submit it through the email portal. It's an excerpt from his most recent book. But nevertheless, there it was as an op-ed in the New York Times from Pope Francis. And it had very much to do with what I'd like us to think about and explore tonight. So the title they gave it in the New York Times was "A Crisis Reveals What Is on Our Hearts." I'm just going to read a little bit of this to you. Hopefully you can see it somewhat well from where you are, but I'll read some of it. And of course, you'll be able to go back to it later if you like, or I'll give you the link to the entire article if you'd like later on too in the follow-up materials. But let's just listen to this a little bit. It begins like this. Pope Francis writes, "In this past year of change, my mind and heart have overflowed with people. People I think of and pray for and sometimes cry with. People with names and faces. People who died without saying goodbye to those they loved. Families in difficulty, even going hungry because there's no work. Sometimes when you think globally, you can be paralyzed. There are so many places of apparently ceaseless conflict. There's so much suffering and need. I find it helps to focus on concrete situations. You see faces looking for life and love in the reality of each person, of each people." Skip to the next paragraph. "These are moments in life that can be ripe for change and conversion. Each of us has had our own stoppage, or if we haven't yet, we will someday. Illness, the failure of a marriage or a business, some great disappointment or betrayal. As in the COVID-19 lockdown, those moments generate a tension, a crisis that reveals what is in our hearts. If we are to come out of this crisis less selfish than when we went in, we have to let ourselves be touched by others' pain. There is a line in Friedrich Hölderlin's Hyperion that speaks to me about how the danger that threatens in a crisis is never total. There is always a way out. Where the danger is, also grows the saving power. That's the genius in the human story. There's always a way to escape destruction. Where humankind has to act is precisely there, in the threat itself. That is where the door opens. This is a moment to dream big, to rethink our priorities, what we value, what we want, what we seek, and to commit to act in our daily life on what we have dreamed of. Now, really, friends, I think we could probably spend our whole time just kind of meditating on what the Pope has written here. And this is just an excerpt of it that I've sort of pasted together. We could take apart each of these paragraphs and think about it and reflect on it together, and that would be worthwhile. But I just want to touch on a few things. Notice what he says here in this time of 2020, and most of us have not thought of 2020 as a privileged time. Most people in general have experienced 2020 as a long year of trial. It's hard to believe that it's coming to an end. I don't even know if people believe that it will end, right? But he's calling it something else without denying that it's been a time of trial, of sadness, of hunger, of pain, of death. He's saying it's a moment ripe for change and conversion. Why? Because a crisis, he says, reveals what is in our hearts. But he's not just saying that the crisis reveals what's currently in our hearts. Think about what else he's saying here. The crisis, any crisis, but this crisis of all the things in 2020, in any of the crises that we find ourselves in now, the crisis also opens a space for us to consider what we want to be in our hearts, who we want to be in our hearts, and maybe even, to put it more strongly, who ought to have a place in our hearts. It's been said before, it's said perhaps too much, that the word crisis as a Chinese character means both a sort of threat and an opportunity at the same time. Well, Pope Francis is bringing up something like that here. There's an opportunity in the crisis, and that's not just to put a smiley face on a very dour situation. He's taking the hardship as seriously as possible. But I'll tell you something else that I found in this. I actually heard in especially the opening paragraph of this excerpt from Pope Francis an echo of something else he has written. It's actually an echo from his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel, sort of a great charter, a declaration on the missionary discipleship into which every Catholic is called, the joy of the gospel. And there's a section, really there's little echoes of this sort of thing all the way throughout, where he talks about, let's just go back and look at it, right? My mind and heart have overflowed with people I think of and pray for and sometimes cry with, people with names and faces. His mind and his heart are overflowing with people. There's little echoes of that all throughout Evangelii Gaudium, but especially towards the end, the penultimate section. He ends with a meditation on Mary, Mary whose heart is always open to her son and all whom her son claims. But right before them, he has a little meditation on the greatest evangelizer in Christian history, which is the Apostle Paul. And he has a little reflection on Paul's heart. It's a beautiful little reflection. It opened up something for me in my own prayer, in my own thinking. I'm not going to give you the whole section, but in paragraph 281, he says, let us peer for a moment into the heart of St. Paul to see what his prayer was like. It was full of people, he says. St. Paul's prayer, his heart, was full of people. And what Pope Francis directs our attention to is this particular passage from Paul's letter to the Philippians. It's near the beginning of this letter. Here's how it goes. I've sort of pasted together a little bit of this for you. Paul writes to the church at Philippi, to this small Christian community, to these particular Christians. He writes, I give thanks to my God at every remembrance of you, praying always with joy in my every prayer for all of you, because of your partnership for the gospel from the first day until now. It is right that I should think this way about all of you, because I hold you in my heart, you who are all partners with me in grace. For God is my witness, how I long for all of you with the affection of Christ Jesus, and this is my prayer, that your love may increase evermore. To be honest with you, this is, I think, a beautiful paragraph from one of Paul's epistles, but perhaps I had heard it too often, and I'd been sort of dulled to what's being said or what's being spoken here, what Paul is saying to these Christians, how he opens his letter. It wasn't until I really reflected more deeply on the heart of Paul that I came to marvel at this, as I think Pope Francis is inviting us to marvel. Let's remember who Paul was before the Lord came to him and took his heart and changed it. Paul was one who sought Christians just like these people that he's writing to, and he sought them to persecute them, to destroy their lives. At one point in the Acts of the Apostles, he says, or he's recorded as saying by St. Luke, that I dragged them out of their houses. It's a violent sort of urge and lust that he had. His heart was filled with malice, with darkness, with evil for these very people that he now says, I hold you with affection in my heart. He's saying to them, I've made a place for you right in the center of who I am. His heart is filled with what? People, faces, and names. His own prayer is populated with their good, their needs. This is what he longs for them to experience joy. This is another thing that we could spend the entire time and probably next time and the time after reflecting on. The conversion of St. Paul's heart. We ought to think about how much work, time, effort, attention went into the remaking of his heart to go from that dark, cold, angry place into a home that welcomed in all these people. Pope Francis goes on in this section of Evangelii Gaudium and says, when evangelizers rise from prayer, their hearts are more open, freed of self-absorption. They are desirous of doing good and sharing their lives with others. I give this to us as a little fervorino, sort of to whet our appetite a little bit about what I'd hope for us to think about and talk about today. Pope Francis has blessed our session. He gave us a perfect little meditation to draw us into thinking about forming community through Eucharistic solidarity. And we have this image, this figure of St. Paul, the opening of his heart, the population of his heart, with the faces and names, the needs and the joys of the Christians he claimed as his own, to lead us into our own reflection. Now, of course, when we start and we think about a pope and we think about St. Paul, we feel like we're talking about very, very distant things or very, very distant people. And part of our sort of the flavor of what we're doing in these sessions is trying to get very local, to think about our own parishes, the people we know, where we are, not far distant things. So let's be reminded of that as we go forward. This is something that we started with last time. I offered the question, what is a Catholic parish? Let's kind of start with the first things. And we had this passage from the Catechism. It says a parish is a definite community of the Christian faithful established on a stable basis within a particular church. It is the place where all the faithful can be gathered together for the Sunday celebration of the Eucharist. And I framed it to us this way. I said, maybe we can think of the parish as the stable community of the faithful. And there's two parts to that, right? There's the gift that the parish gives stability to each of us, to the faithful, but there's also the task for each of us to provide stability to the parish, to the community, to others. But we also have to reflect more deeply on what the source of that stability, that foundation of parish life is. It is the Eucharist. It is a Eucharistic stability because the Lord is the one who dwells and abides constantly in our community, at the center of it, upon the altar, in the tabernacle. The community is formed around his act of abiding with us. Well, I gave a little hint of this last time, but now let me pay off the debt. I said I wanted to focus on the second part of that little passage from the Catechism, that the parish is the place where all the faithful can be gathered together for the Sunday celebration of the Eucharist. That almost sounds like a sort of functional or a not very impressive definition of a parish. Well, it's the place where you can get together on Sunday for this thing that we do, celebrate the Eucharist. That's not an insignificant thing. And maybe we have come to realize more fully in the year 2020 how not insignificant that is. Maybe for many of us, for the first time, we actually longed for the parish as a place to gather on Sundays and didn't take it for granted that it would just be open, that it would just be there. And this is a place where I think we can think about that crisis that Pope Francis talks about in our very particular situation. The parish as a place of Eucharistic solidarity, well, let's just have a little review. I'll do this from my perspective here in South Bend, Indiana, in our diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend, the way in which things came to us in 2020, probably similar to what you experienced. Well, from March to May of 2020, there was the outright suspension of public masses in our diocese. There were some, the Eucharist was still celebrated and celebrated for all of us, but the gathering of the faithful was suspended. We could not be together in the parish for the Sunday Eucharist or for any public gathering of the Eucharist, as it were. From May 2020 until now, there's been 2 or 3 renewals of this. There's been a dispensation to all the faithful in our diocese for the Sunday obligation of the Eucharist, of attending Mass. As I mentioned last time, this isn't to sort of trumpet any kind of piety or anything, but I do take my children to our Saturday Vigil Mass, which is the least well attended, and we sit up in the loft, and I try and wrangle our 2-year-old from touching and tasting and eating everything in sight. But nevertheless, in our church, as I imagine some of your churches, it is sparsely attended. There are people there, and it's pretty much the same people every week. But I don't know what percentage of the community is there, but we're probably somewhere around 20%, 15% of what that normal Saturday Vigil Mass would look like. And the Sunday Masses are much the same. We stopped for a while. We could not gather together on Sunday for the Eucharist. We could not see each other, be around each other. It was actually forbidden. And then now there's this period where it's touch and go whether we can be around each other. Many are not there. We do not see the same people in the same place. It's not, the parish isn't again yet fully the place in which all the faithful can gather together for the Sunday celebration of the Eucharist. So I think there's this kind of question, actually I know there's this question that started to bubble up for me almost immediately in March. And this partly was because I'm a parishioner who cares about our parish, but also because I'm the chair of our pastoral council and I'm continually thinking about the life of the parish. I had to think, has parish life been suspended? Right? The public masses have been suspended. Obviously, all of our religious education was suspended. All of the programming that was on the schedule had been suspended. The parish school had been suspended. Everything had been suspended. So has parish life itself been suspended? And if that's the case, in this time of great instability that everybody was experiencing, great uncertainty, especially there in March and April when there was even less known then than there is now about everything that's going on. In this time of instability, if parish life has been suspended, does that mean that we've lost the stability of the parish? Does it mean that we don't have stability at this central place? Have we not actually retained it as a stable place for all of us, a stable community? Because we can no longer gather, because all of our ways of being parish seem like very suddenly were stopped indefinitely. Well, I wasn't, as you might imagine, wasn't quite satisfied with that thought. I thought to myself, and I talked to my pastor about this and to some of my fellow parishioners on the council, this can't mean parish life is suspended. This means we have to think creatively about how parish life is not only continued, but might actually even have to be strengthened in a new way. Is this, in fact, when the stability of the Eucharistic community is most needed? Is the other question that can be asked in a time like that. And a time like that, March, April, May, has extended into November and coming into December of 2020, and who knows what 2021 will be like. When we don't have all those things we become comfortable with, reliant upon, gathering together, just happening to be there on Sunday to sort of see people, to having casual, informal conversations, to feel like we're connected, at least in some way. When that's been taken away, is this in fact when the stability of the Eucharistic community is most needed? Well, what I want to do is I don't want to think about this theoretically and abstractly. I want to talk about this again concretely. And I want to give you to think about, at least to ponder, a sort of concrete example of a response to this kind of situation that we tried to enact at our parish. I'm just going to offer it to you as sort of food for thought. And it's not simply, I should say this, it's not simply about responding to a crisis. It's actually in the midst of a crisis, trying to figure out and actually work our way towards what we should be more like as a parish all the time. If that makes sense. It's not just a response to a crisis. It's an effort, almost an extraordinary effort, that moves us in a direction of what the parish community should be more like all the time. So we created something called the Parish Life Outreach. We had to have a name so I could talk about it. We just call it Parish Life Outreach. Why is it an outreach? Because nobody is together in the parish. If there is going to be parish life, if it's going to reach people, we have to reach out to reach people. How do we build Eucharistic solidarity in unstable times? So here's the little idea we had, and then we acted on it. The idea was this. We had a parishioner-led effort. And I say parishioner-led, and this is really important. This was not our pastor's idea. It was not left to the parish staff. It was parishioners. It came from the pastoral council, and it was all run through parishioners. So our pastor was involved. He helped, but it came from parishioners. A parishioner-led effort to make personal contact with every parish household. That was the idea. There's the charter. We're not together. Everybody's pulled apart. There's no way to know what's going on with people. Do people need things? How are people doing? How do we not only stay in touch, but how do we actually strengthen the community of the parish during this time? Well, here's our simple idea. We'll make contact with every parish household. That was it. How do you do this? Well, here are the ingredients. There's a little bit more involved than this, but these are the basic ingredients. You got to get people together who are going to make the contact by phone, not by email, not by text, not by Facebook message. We couldn't do it in person, obviously, because life is what it is at the moment. By phone, the human voice. So you need a team of people to do that. You need access to the parish database. So you have people's phone numbers, you know who you're contacting. It takes some organization to put this together. And then really what it needs, the most important ingredient, is effort. It just took some work, some commitment to do this. So what did we do? The idea was this. We're going to get in touch with every parish household. At our parish, we're sort of a medium-sized parish, 900 plus households in our parish, 900 plus households. So I got this started to talk to people, first with the pastoral council, got the pastoral council to talk to other people. Hey, we're going to do this. People were kind of interested, excited about it, getting people to volunteer, to commit to be part of this. We ended up with 57 people who were willing to be part of this parish life outreach team to make calls to every household in the parish. Organized it with spreadsheet, giving everybody since we have 900 plus households, 57 people, it came out to 15 to 18 households per person. So you got the basic information on the household, figured out ways to be able to take in what we heard from people. If there were particular needs that people had that we wanted to respond to as a parish, or we wanted to give the effort towards, we had a way to kind of collect the needs and record them and be able to communicate with each other. I can share all of that with you later, all the logistics. I can give you this as follow-up resources. I just want you to get the idea of it now. The simple part of this was basically just a phone call. And the phone call had 3 parts to it of a first contact. We hoped that there were additional phone calls afterwards, which there were. But in the first phone call, it's almost a cold call. Like people are worried at first that it's a telemarketer calling, right? No, it's not a telemarketer. It's me. It's Lenny from the parish, St. Joe. Hey, we don't know each other. We haven't met, but I'm just calling from St. Joe Parish. I don't need any money. I'm just calling you to see how you're doing. Here are the 3 parts, a check-in. How are you doing? Do you need anything? What's going on with you right now? Remember, this started in March, April, just trying to get a sense of what was going on in people's life. What does this situation look like for you? So just kind of starting a conversation like that. Second part, pledge of support. If you do need anything, tell me. But hey, we just want you to know on behalf of the parish, if something comes up, whatever, you need something, you just need someone to talk to, there's something material you need, you're connected to something, you need something, contact me. I'm your personal contact. I mean, of course you can call the parish, but I'm calling you on behalf of our parish community. We want to stay connected. We want you to have the support of this community, and we want us to be able to bear whatever comes up together as best we can. So that was the second part. Third part, further outreach. Hey, before we go, just if you know anyone else now, or you come to know others, your neighbors, others around you who are in need in some way, feel free to let us know that too. We don't have like a treasury of things that we're trying to give away, but just let us know. We're in touch with a number of people in the parish. We're going to try as best we can to respond to people's needs, whatever they might be. And if we don't have the resources to respond to it, we're going to work with them to try and find the resources. So that was the further outreach. Make sense? Just these 3 parts. How are you doing? Pledge of support. I want to be a personal contact for you, anything you might need, and then we'd follow up later to see how people are doing. And then a further outreach, not just you, but anybody, whether they're in their parish or not, whether it's your next door neighbor, whoever, others in need, let us know. We want St. Joe Parish to be part of responding to what's going on in people's lives now. That was the basic idea of this parish life outreach. Now, I'm going to say a little bit more about it in a little while, but I want you to not just listen to me about this. I'm going to give you basically a little testimonial from somebody else who did this. So I happened to write a little article about this and put it in one of our Catholic publications, and people at other parishes found it and said, yes, this is what we want to do too. One of the people is a woman by the name of Sue Bismack. She is a parishioner and a pastoral council member. Again, not a member of the parish staff. She's a parishioner. She's on the pastoral council at St. John Vianney Parish in Saginaw, Michigan. We got in touch. I shared with her some of the resources. She just went with this at her parish and gathered people and did something similar. I worked with her in another webinar for something else a couple of months ago. This is I kind of put together a few different clips of her talking about this, just to give you about 5 minutes from her of listening to it. Now, I'm tempting fate here because I'm using technology upon technology. It's going to be a YouTube video embedded within a Prezi presentation coming to you over Zoom. There's all kinds of danger in what's about to happen. So here's the other thing I'm going to do. In the chat, I have just sent a link to this YouTube video. It's just the clip that I'm going to show you of Sue speaking. It might even be better for the audio if you just click on that and watch it. I'm going to put it on our presentation nevertheless, but you're also going to have the link there. Okay, about 5 minutes, we're going to listen to Sue, and then I'll talk about some of what we hear. Here we go.
So yes, I'm Sue Bismack, parishioner and a member of the parish council at St. John Vianney Parish in Saginaw, Michigan, mid-Michigan. So yeah, I distinctly remember that last Mass that my husband and I attended before our state and diocese began the shutdown process. And there were already social distancing protocols in place, and the attendance at that last Mass was quite light. And a few of us, after Mass a couple of us started talking and expressing our concerns for possible vulnerable parish members. And we initially were kind of focused on those who might need groceries or medications picked up and delivered, and kind of started talking about the logistics of how do we do this safely and with social distancing. It sparked a fire in me in two ways, really. First, I realized that our whole parish is going through this, and we needed to call everybody. And second, it helped me realize that we can't work out every worry and every detail and the logistics of everything. And we just needed to start calling, and we'll figure it out as we go. And we started with a group of 10 team members, which are the usual suspects, people you call on when you're starting something. And we scheduled a Zoom meeting. We got the document to everyone and kind of just wanted to talk through getting on the same page. And now, granted, this was in March, and this was our first Zoom meeting, and it was a riot, trying to get us all on board with this. But we've since become pros. So our purpose, we decided, was twofold. So first, our short-term mission was to, like Lenny said, it was to check on them, pray with them, offer assistance to all of our fellow church family and anyone else that they needed us to pray for or needed help. And then our long-term vision was to build relationships and for a stronger parish community. So we had this first meeting and assigned the call list, and we said, okay, here we go, let's make these calls. And then what we also did is we scheduled 1 week later, we scheduled a follow-up Zoom meeting so that we could share our experiences and ask questions and lend support to each other. And this is where we really started seeing the love of God flowing. And as we shared our call experiences, we realized that people were in need, but not necessarily in the way we originally thought. Instead of physical and tangible needs, it was much more about emotional support and reassurances that those were needed more than anything. And many times it was just someone to talk to. And it's been surprising at the low number of need requests we've had. We have had some. We've had some grocery requests, many prayer requests. We've had a couple requests that we did refer on to organizations within the community. It was really bigger than our volunteer group was prepared for, but we worked it out. And in the beginning, we had a few, as we called, there were skeptical people with that. They put on that voice. So, is this a telemarketer or, because they didn't recognize the phone number. Or sometimes we got no answer at all because they were probably screening. So we would explain who we were. And if we didn't get a hold of them, we'd leave a message and we would let them know our contact information. Again, that was so important. And some of them called us back. But then also, some of them, when we would call them back on, we usually tried another day at another time, they would actually answer the phone. They would recognize our number and they had listened to our message. So they knew we were someone from church. So, and they happily answered and talked to us. So in our calls, we also recruited some team members or people would volunteer. And so we currently have 22 outreach calling team members. We continue to have bi-weekly meetings to share our thoughts and ideas. And we share kind of how to get past any roadblocks we come across. And one we had was initially was, we would ask, how are you doing on that first call? And pretty much everybody said, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. And we would say, well, how are you really doing? And we found that we would the offer of prayer opened a lot of hearts. And especially with our younger demographic, maybe the 20, 30, 40-year-olds, we would ask if they had anyone that we could pray for and that we could add to our parish prayer line. And also if they needed any prayers in their situation. And they really realized that we didn't want anything and we really just wanted to offer support in whatever way that they needed. So that was really building trust. So almost every call that we made, we were met with appreciation and thank yous and gratefulness for keeping our parish connected in this unusual time. we're building friendships, and we can't wait to see each other and sometimes meet the person, because we have two different masses. We have a Saturday and a Sunday mass, so sometimes we don't know the person. This whole experience has been just a blessing on our parish, and not just for the person receiving the call, but also for our calling team has just expressed what a joy this has been. So we're starting to identify those who definitely should be called regularly. But then we're also thinking of other ideas for all of our parishioners, maybe a quarterly call or handwritten notes every so often, just things that will continue to keep us a strong parish community. And I can't even express how excited I am and how much of a blessing this has been for me and for this team and for our parish.
Good. So that's a little bit from Sue, who's up in Saginaw, Michigan, as I said. Now, one of the things I want us to pay attention to in what she was saying, she's giving a little bit of a testimonial of this effort that I just sort of described to you on a slide, basically. But one of the things she said at the end, I think is really important for us to realize, like I said, and like Pope Francis was saying in his op-ed, the crisis, it can reveal the hearts, but it also is the opportunity to recognize who ought to be in our hearts. This, at her parish and at my parish too, this kind of outreach was a response to a particular, very peculiar, unprecedented sort of situation for, at least for us. I mean, others have had situations similar to this before, but we hadn't. So this was a response to that. But what Sue said was that they're already thinking about how to keep this going. Not the exact same thing in the exact same way, because this was crafted for a period of sort of crisis and being in, dispersal and not being able to be together and all of that. But she said, we're definitely recognizing the people that we need to call regularly. Who are those people? Well, I could imagine from our parish, these are the kind of people that we've tried to think about and talk about before, right? The people who are kind of on the margins of the parish community, are not really connected. They don't have the other ties that bind. They're not, at least for our parish, they're not the school families. They don't work at the University of Notre Dame like many of the rest of us and know people from there. They don't have the sort of natural affinity groups within the parish that others have. They're the ones who maybe dutifully come to Mass, sit by themselves, maybe know one or two other people, and then leave and nobody really knows, right? Those are kind of the people possibly that Sue and her team are talking about. These are the people we should follow up with more often. They actually need someone to talk to. They might have some material needs. They might have some spiritual needs. We're going to stay in touch with them. The parish needs to be more engaged with these people and vice versa. I loved her sort of very practical ideas. Maybe we're going to have a quarterly call to all the parish households, or maybe we'll do something with handwritten notes. That's the kind of energy and effort that I think is a real act of evangelization. When we think of evangelization, a lot of times we think of these grand ideas, right? We think of St. Paul traveling 10,000 miles across the Mediterranean. But it was also St. Paul writing this particular letter to this particular church and telling them that I pray for you in my heart. It's that very simple act, which is an act of evangelization. I love that sort of practicality and simplicity, but also the directness that Sue is talking about. That's the way in which I think a time of crisis becomes a time of opportunity, of renewed missionary zeal on a local level. What kind of personal investment would it take in our parish to build stronger bonds, to actually know each other, to know what each other needs, what each other is going through, what the joys in each other's lives are? Not to know everything about everyone, but everyone in the parish should have someone in the parish that knows what's going on with them, at least. That's a little bit of what I hear there in what Sue's talking about. Oops, we're not going to listen to that again. I also want to bring bring this back in contact with something I shared with you last time. Again, this had to do with my own parish, St. Joseph Parish. We were talking about pastoral priorities. This is something that our pastoral council had started to work on even a couple of years ago. But look at those last two pastoral priorities we had. We wanted to foster community through smaller, more personal approach. And we also wanted to intentionally engage the unengaged, both within the parish and outside the parish, through charitable service. My pastor and I talked about this as we started to get this parish life outreach thing going. We almost couldn't believe how strangely providential it was. It's this exact kind of effort we would need to really do this thing we wanted to do, to begin to kind of create new energy, to foster community through smaller, more personal approach. A phone call from a parishioner to a parishioner household, actually talking to each other, building up some of those relationships. Not all of the phone calls lasted a very long time, but some of them did. And there were repeat phone calls. And now there's follow-up on that. But then also engaging the unengaged. You can't serve needs that you don't see. You can't heal wounds that you never recognize. You can't share joy that you never come across. The first step to charitable service is actually seeing where the people are, where the opportunities are. In any event, there's something in this kind of effort which you would say it's the most inopportune time to do something. Everything's up in the air. But paradoxically, it was the most opportune time, or it is the most opportune time to try something like this, more personal, more direct, because it responds to an immediate need, but it also creates the kind of initiative and energy that ought to be captured later on too. It ought to be extended in a different sort of way. But I do think there's a kind of urgency in the moment of crisis, because that's when you can actually venture out to do something like that. We all get too comfortable otherwise. That's at least my thought on that. I think this is the moment. And I think that's what Pope Francis was talking about in his op-ed. This is the moment to actually make that movement, that uncomfortable movement, because when all the other comforts come rushing back in, you won't venture the chance as a parish community, as particular parishioners, whatever it might be. We're going to come towards an end here in just a little bit. I wanted to give us that one sort of concrete example to ruminate on. But I want to bring this point together, this forging of a Eucharistic identity by initiating movements of mutual concerns. That's just my wordiness in the title, but forging a Eucharistic identity, what does that mean? Remember that the parish community itself, each of us as disciples ourselves, is formed by the Lord's abiding with us. It's his solidarity with us that makes us who we are as Catholics. That's the first thing. But we grow into our Eucharistic identities as we respond in kind, as we establish, as I put it here, habits of personal connection within the parish, where we share burdens and joys together, where we actually know each other, not just know who each other is, but come to know each other a little bit more intimately and personally. Not everybody knowing everything about everybody else, but actually sharing more closer ties, where everybody in the parish should have at least someone who knows what they're going through, so that we can serve and love each other. I have long loved this particular line from Pope Benedict XVI's first encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, where he speaks about this sort of Eucharistic identity. And he says this: a Eucharist which does not pass over into the concrete practice of love is intrinsically fragmented. What is he saying? The Eucharist that is received, but does not transform us, those who receive it, to be that Eucharistic love to others, have actually fragmented that Eucharistic gift. It's the gift of Christ to us and the task of our response. And it's a concrete practice of love. That's what Sue Bismack is talking about, a very concrete practice of love, a very concrete sort of outreach. There's more that comes from that, but it's almost like the movement, the energy to do that is the first and most important part. And that's where I want us to think, not just within the boundaries of the parish, but think back to that third question that was part of this outreach on the phone call. There are the three parts: check in, how you doing? Second, if you need anything, I'm your personal contact. But then third, if you know others in need. This is the kind of opening for activating the parish as a source of renewal for the community. But I see these as going together. This energy to actually forge the bonds within the parish is the same kind of energy that moves us out of the confines of the parish into the renewal of the community, to see the needs of those around us, our neighbors, not necessarily the Catholics, not necessarily our fellow parishioners, but to actually have this parish community be a source of renewal through the activity of its parishioners for the surrounding community. Let me give you a little anecdote for that, and then we'll bring this to a close. How reaching out in charity is not something in addition to the life and the health of the parish. Actually, reaching out in charity is essential to the life of the parish. It actually builds the community within. This is a little anecdote that comes from this just astounding and far too infrequently read book, The Stature of Waiting by W.H. Vanstone. He gives an example in the midst of talking about some other things within this book of this sort of planned community that was coming together in England, where the designers of the community, you can kind of imagine, I don't know if it was a gated community or what it was, but some kind of pre-planned community. They wanted to really have this neighborhood be very neighborly, right? And so they put all kinds of, whatever it was, sort of accessories within the community, ways for people to kind of get together, things that people would share, fun that they would have. It's kind of like the apartment complex my brother lives in San Diego. That's what I imagine, where they have all the games and everything's there and it's going to bring people together, right? Well, they tried several of these and the sort of community that they imagined just wasn't showing up, right? They were imagining like people all being together and they just kind of kept putting more and more into these communities. And I don't know, like people were still kind of separate and a few friendships and whatever it was. But there was one community among all these other communities they built where this feeling and this reality of neighborliness actually emerged. And there was one thing different about that community. Here's how he tells it. At the center of the small area lived a woman, the mother of 5 children, who was confined strictly to bed for several months with ulcerated legs. And the common decency of those who lived nearby would not allow them to ignore the helpless predicament of the mother. They attended to her and her family. In so doing, they came to know one another, and in an informal way to work together in sharing out the necessary tasks. And so the much desired neighborliness was soon created. What did the community actually form around? Wounds. There were wounds in the middle, and these people came together to tend to the wounds. And it wasn't just that they were bonded to her. In fact, it turns out, as he tells this, she was actually quite nasty as a person to them. It wasn't just the bonding to her. Actually, as they did this together, they were bonded to one another. This seems very much the genius of the church. When Christ appeared to his apostles, what did he do? He showed them his wounds. From the very beginning, the community of the church was formed around wounds. They shared together in the common task of charity. That's why I say this outreach of charity is for the life of the parish, not as a over and above the health of the parish. It's actually essential for the life of the parish. We in our own parish, I'll speak a little bit personally here, we've kind of prized the community feel of our parish, and we try to do more and more community type stuff, picnic and auction and trivia night and all this stuff. And you know what? It does something, but it doesn't do enough, because we keep trying to form community by being insular. But this is the way to form Christian community. It's actually outward facing. You do it together. And I think a lot of the sort of community formation in the church in general has been kind of like that insular kind of pre-planned community idea. Let's just have more activities. We want to reach young people. Let's just try to recreate the things that they're going to do outside the church in the church. We'll just get them together to drink. We'll just get them together to do a movie night. Well, some of that's all good. And like fraternity is built that way. And I get that. But you know what actually would get young people? Get them engaged in doing stuff for other people, as one example, right? Move outward together. Then you have community that's formed, as an example. Okay. I want to bring this now to a close because we're about at our time. I want to leave at least a few minutes for conversation, and I'll make sure my audio works. Just some questions for you to consider, not necessarily now, but you'll have these afterwards too. In seeking Eucharistic solidarity, here are perhaps some questions. In what concrete way can your parish empower direct personal contact precisely in these unstable times? Not planning for when things go back to more or less normal, but actually think about these unstable times as the privileged time to think about this, direct personal contact. Again, I can share with you everything we did in the parish life outreach and give you lots and lots of, you can think about that, but that may not be your way. I want to invite you to think about that. Secondly, who are the people? Like Sue Bismack said, we got 10 people at first, kind of always the people that you get when you want to start something. Who are the people within the parish that can provide energy? Because it takes energy. You got to get other people involved. Organization takes a fair bit of organization, and compassion to do both this in-reach within the parish and start moving towards the outreach. So there's actually movement within the parish, more movement. And third, how can your parish community best perceive and act on the needs of your surrounding community? That perceiving part is really important. As a short lesson, there are two parts to the virtue of mercy. The first is aesthetic perceptivity. You have to be able to see the beauty that is not there. You have to actually be able to recognize suffering, which means you have to go see it. And then it's volitional action. You have to be able to act on it. That part about perceiving the needs in the surrounding community and actual people and the households that aren't part of the parish, that takes work and effort. It takes a whole lot of going towards. That's a big movement for individuals and for a parish community. How can that be done? Only once that's done and as that is done can acting on those needs potentially begin.